Hello, my name is Tolg. I exist, therefore I think too much. I cuss, and if you don't like it, you can go away. And I do it casually, especially when I read these books, because I'm not attempting to. So, I was gonna read more of Marguerite, Porete, The Mirror of Simple Souls. I'm on chapter 16. I hope to get to chapter 17, but I will rant. Absolutely. My take on it is not a necessarily educated take on it. It is absolutely born from my experiences and my subjective understanding in life. I did briefly just reread the introduction, and I've been saying that she's a beguinage nun, which sounds like a bagel or, the bakery item. But she's a beguine, and essentially it just meant, freelance. There was an overflow. There were too many single women. They couldn't take in more. And in that, begging was just a term for anybody who was religious, but maybe not in a absolutely recognized way. So therein it was also a term for a heretic. And I was right in a prior video, but I may have edited it out because I wasn't absolutely sure of myself. But the Dominican sect of, I want to say Catholicism, it's like brotherhood, was made to, and I don't know how else to say it other than to say take care of, where she ended up being, preach to, teach, look over, consult if there were confessions to be made. So, up until chapter 15, it sounds like she's suffering, dissociative identity disorder. She writes this from the perspective of many different authorships. Initially, it was just 3, which, to me, made a pattern and it made sense, so I wasn't immediately trying to jump on that boat. It was herself, and then the soul, and then love. And throughout the chapters, she has introduced more than just those. And even within those, there are separations. So love is separated into different types of love, and each of these are given entities unto themselves. So like fine love is different from pure love, on and on. And also, reason is of worldly virtue or worldly wisdom, and therein it ought not to be trusted or used. And if reason is mentioned, we can understand that it's going to be bad. It's not a voice to be trusted, a source of information to be trusted. And I guess up until this point, the bones of it, she says that there are 9 points to a soul that has died unto itself, died to the flesh, I think is another way of saying that, an annihilated life is how she initially phrases it. And then when I had made that video about that chapter, I got confused and called it annihilated soul throughout, but later on she refers to it herself as an annihilated soul, so it seems like we had the same confusion. And then so there are nine main understandings of what makes an annihilated life, and these are seen as perceivably good, but they read as bad things. And there are 7 virtues, I want to say, 7 virtues. And one has to pass through the virtues, which are inherently abusive. From her understanding, these virtues are things that people ought to practice, but in passing through each of these virtues, learning these virtues, practicing these virtues, it is hellacious. And you go from one to the other, presumably, and then at the end, you die to the flesh. And that makes the annihilated life, which brings you closer to God, because then God acts through you as an avatar, rather than you needing to practice these virtues, because God is all perfect. So anything that the body that was known as you does at the point that you've been annihilated is perfect. And I believe that was the source of heresy that begat her being burned at the stake. This book did get her burned alive for writing it, for heresy against the church. And to my knowledge, there was a gentleman after this that would go forth and continue to preach. He was also labeled as a heretic. I don't remember what death he suffered, but I don't know that he was kept alive long, though he did live longer than her in preaching it rather than writing it. And on the note of like dying to the flesh, and I said it in another video, but it's a common, well, from my understanding, I was raised non-denominational, which essentially just means, there isn't a denomination of Christian teachings that they answer to. It's anything is on the table in regards to Christianity. And there are many subgenres of Christianity. While Christianity in and of itself is supposed to be the teachings of Christ, they all go about it differently. And so if I say non-denominational, it simply means unregulated. So in the non-denominational community, as far as I understand, and I've been out of it for some time, dying to the flesh was pretty normal a concept. I know there are disagreements with non-denominational and especially Catholicism, or, more strictly practiced subgenres of Christianity, and therein less strict. So there was a comment recently that said, among Christians, it's still, what she writes in here is still seen as groundbreaking and odd, I guess. I don't remember the exact word. Thank you for your comment. I liked it a lot and it helped. But to my knowledge, it isn't groundbreaking, because that is what a lot of non-denominational churches teach, is that and I do believe some sects of Catholicism as well, that the flesh is sin. That even in the Garden of Eden, God being omniscient and omnipresent, always present, was able to understand that the creation of humanity would always give in to base desires, animalistic desires. And that is why I think in some sects of Catholicism specifically, they teach, the original sin is being human, being born at all. And non-denominational kind of skews a little separately, with a understanding that flesh is attributed to the same term as secular, and that just simply means worldly. So anything that isn't necessarily divinity, anything that is not necessarily constructed to be entirely godly, can be flesh or of the flesh. And so when this is saying, an annihilated life, and that's Catholicism, that's what I am attempting to draw a connection to when I say dying to the flesh. And it can be adhered to differently depending on the person and the church. I did also in a prior video say that a lot of Christians are slightly suicidal, and I don't mean in the stereotypical way of, mental health issues, but more in a way of it's a learned tribute in Christianity to end up hating the world and blaming the world for any ill and ailment. Personally, I never liked it and I never understood it, because even if this wasn't the Garden of Eden, it was still God's creation, and everything that God created was good, so said the Bible. Garden of Eden was just supposed to be like a safe zone for humanity to figure its shit out in, I guess. And so that's essentially what I meant by saying most of Christians are suicidal. It's just saying maybe exhausted would have been a better way of saying that. Exhausted by the premise of being surrounded by everything that is not innately God, which also crosses its own logic because God is infinite according to Christian logic. So none of this, by Christian logic, by biblical logic, would be necessary at all. These are patterns created by the individual to survive whatever environment or whatever rulings existed in their subjective life. I therein don't recommend anything that is said here. I don't recommend a lot of what religion teaches, as I think it is all very subjective. And so if God is infinite, my reason or my wisdom, my learned experience would teach me that, I don't understand, rather, that why one would create something that they didn't want to exist. It doesn't make sense to me for you not to live out your life with the individuality that you were meant to. If God simply wanted an avatar, you would not exist. And therein, I go back to saying it's, a mental illness to try to opt out of life because it's hellacious. And having said that, when she lists these I think it's 10 virtues, and how hellacious they are, and how after going through them, she sings to let them know that they were bad. They were awful to go through, and she subjected herself to them, and now she's done. It just reads to me like she did what Catherine of Siena did, and what a lot of abuse victims do. They mentally break, and then they attribute their abuser to a character that they trust more than the abuser. And therein the abuse is easier to suffer through because it is now righteous. So the 7 virtues going through it broke her into someone that is now a more perfect being. And she's safe, and she cannot be argued against because it's God. And so if you argue against her, you argue against God. And that's where we're at up until chapter 16. And I feel like this book is just going to continue in the same direction. So chapter 16, here love responds to reason concerning what she said, that the soul knows all and knows nothing. So love then speaks and says, reason, says love, to what I said, that the unencumbered soul knows all and so knows nothing. I answer you that she knows by the virtue of faith, which is capitalized, so it's an entity unto itself, what is necessary for her to know for her salvation. And so she knows nothing about what God possesses in her by himself for her sake. That's another thing. She has a tendency to be superfluous with her words. She adds a generous amount of needless words, and I have this issue with a lot of authors. The word count makes the pay and helps you promote your ideology by putting other people into a position where they don't have the ability to think about it. So reason says, love, to what I said, that the unencumbered soul knows all and so knows nothing. I answer you that she knows by the virtue of faith what is necessary for her to know for her salvation. Essentially, due to being an annihilated life, due to God living through her, and her faith in God living through her, and faith being its own entity, so therein, all of these sources being downloaded and working in orchestrated fashion together, the annihilation puts her in a position of not knowing anything, but everything else puts her in a position of being able to act on something, so it would seem as knowledge, but it is, for her specifically, she is being puppeted. It is the knowledge of something else. And so she knows nothing about what God possesses in her by himself for her sake. And that's the part where I say there are too many words, needless words. Why would God possess something if God is everything? And then he possesses something that is in her, but the by himself doesn't make sense there. Unless this again is in reference to her being puppeted, and so the possession of what exists inside of her is there by him, by his doing, and therein he is doing it for her sake. That's I guess the sense that I can make out of it, although I just broke the sentence down slowly. So there are better ways to phrase that. God exists inside of her for her sake. Being a way to say that is easier to understand. So he who will not give to anyone except to her. That then promotes her above everyone else in existence. And I want to say that that's a claim to individuality, which again, Catholicism at the time, this is 1100 AD, and she is religious but belonging essentially nowhere, like a freelance spiritualist. So it would be seen as wise for others to teach her that she should not exist by herself and for herself, especially as a woman in 1100 AD. And all the more so, actually, she's able to read and write. It would make me think that that could almost pose a threat to power. I don't remember when it started, and I don't know when it ended. A rough guess of when it ended, maybe 1980. But women still are constantly seen as a threat to power simply through existing, and especially when that existence is granted a platform by which they have the ability to be understood. And I think back earlier, 1100 AD, sure, would have been... That can't be right. Is this really 1100 AD? Maybe. Okay. It would have been easier to say it's because of women's wiles. They were created as a womb, and therein utilizing reason. Terrible. Your learned experience is born from being wholly only in giving birth, And so if you say anything beyond that, how is it to be trusted, would be my understanding of a early mindset of misogyny. So in a lot of this, she does this thing of she'll cross her ego out of existence, like this annihilated life, God living through her, but then she'll immediately go back into that she deserves to live, and that in God living through her or for her or granting on to her, that she is above others. And so it feels like this constant tug of war of trying to feed into her ego and understanding that her ego will be destroyed and taken from her. And so trying to keep anybody that would do that at bay by giving them an inch, it would seem. And it feels like that's what that sentence said. And what I just said, goes immediately right into the next sentence. Thus, through this intellect, this soul knows all, and so knows nothing. She wills all things, says love, and so wills nothing. For this soul, says love, wills so perfectly the will of God, that she neither knows nor is able nor wills in her own will except the will of God, because love holds her in strong captivity. Okay, I don't personally appreciate the picture of her being held in captivity, but I guess if you're captive to the Dominican priests who are telling you that you're never going to be good enough, especially as a single woman who can read and write, your best option is to be held captive by someone who is all-loving and perfect, right? And so she wills nothing, for it is so small a thing that she wills what God wills in her. And that's just repetitive from the prior, and she does that a lot. She'll repeat one word to such an extent that if you read it too fast, it would seem to lose its meaning. And so far, that word has been will. I mean, in prior chapters as well. Okay, God wills in her compared to what she would will to will, that she can only have what God wills she might will. So, again, she just doesn't think for herself. God thinks for her. And what I just said goes into the next sentence again. For her will is nothing compared with her sufficiency, which will never be given to her. Ouch, dude, she will never be sufficient for herself. And I guess that's, being born is bad. Which would promote you to want to seek out God and there in the church if you're never going to be sufficient unto yourself. You're never going to be enough. And modern Christianity, especially non-denomination, absolutely does teach that. That is a very common practice, is you are never enough, and especially for yourself, you are never enough. And the only thing that can fill that void, that hole, is God. And I don't argue that. But I think the reason I don't argue that might be a little bit different from the reason the church doesn't argue that. And again, I believe that God is everything, like the Old Testament says. And in that, nothing can fill your void or the hole in your heart other than everything. So, ta-da. But that isn't to say that you should be greedy and, eat up everything in the world. There is absolutely a reasonable approach to especially economic distress, and it has been practiced in a lot of history, which is burn the old money, however that comes about. So I don't mean to say that, to fill this void, you should go seek out literally everything ever. In my understanding, if God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, it would be very much like a understanding in multiple dimension theory, and pocket dimensions onto that. And you would be able to access everything by understanding it as an entity that can only exist in all of time if all of time exists at one point and always. And that's, a head spinner. So, that's more or less what I mean. So her sufficiency will never be given to her, and thus the will is from the will of God, as was said above. So now she's definitely helping you understand that she's repetitive. Therefore, by this intellect, this soul wills all things, and so wills nothing. And again, for the last 3 chapters, I have paid reference to Da Vinci saying, or getting into an argument with a colleague about, vacuums being nothing or being not nothing, where Da Vinci says nothing can only be equated to nothing, and vacuums are able to be mathematically dismantled or, understood. So therein they cannot be nothing. So where I spin off from that is you can't have everything without having nothing. So then love speaks again. Love was just speaking. And she'll do that a lot as well. Continue to reintroduce the same person, same entity speaking. This daughter of Zion desires neither masses nor sermons, neither fasts nor prayers. And that is prior, she mentions, these are practices that one must go through if they are learning the virtues, not if they have become an avatar to God, because only God would not need to practice that, and that God is all perfect. So the only people that would desire all of these things are people that are still people and have not died to themselves. Now, something mentioned here is the daughter of Zion. And Zion is capitalized. And non-denomination does teach that God is a God of many names. But Zion is known in Christian teaching, in biblical and Hebrew teaching, to be Mount Zion. I'm not sure if it's also applicable to be another name of God, but Mount Zion. And, it's referenced in a lot of works. One of my favorite artists is, I can't remember right now, and I'll remember it later, maybe. But it is referenced a lot, and Mount Zion itself is the mountain that the angels, when kicked out of heaven, descended on. And that is why it's a holy site. It's because it's where the fallen angels resided. And these fallen angels would then go from Mount Zion and see the daughters of humanity and say, let's create sacrilege. Let's create an abomination. That is Mount Zion. And, shoulder to shoulder with other mythology, Mount Zion is where the ancient gods in, I think it's Sumerian and Babylonian mythology, where they lived. And I think when Rome moved into the area, they also adapted that understanding, was that, that was the mountain by which the gods lived on. So, fun bit of trivia there. And then Reason responds to, daughter of Zion doesn't need anything because she doesn't exist and she's perfect. Reason responds, and reason is bad. Whatever reason is saying, bad. And why, Lady Love, says Reason, this is the food of holy souls. And love responds, "This is true, says love, for those who beg. But this soul begs for nothing, for she has no need to desire something which would be outside of her. But if God is everything, and God is inside of her, then everything is inside of her, so nothing is outside of her." Crossed logic. "Now listen, reason, says love. Why would the soul desire these things named above, since God is surely everywhere? Without this as with this. Without this as with this. But this soul has no thought nor word, nor work except the practice of the grace of the divine Trinity. This soul has no anxiety about sin, which she might have ever committed, nor about suffering, which God might have suffered for her, nor about the sins or anxiety in which her neighbors remain." Again, she doesn't exist, so why would she feel? And it is, Catholic practice that, as well as it's just Christian understanding that God died on the cross and in the moment of death. People, pay homage to the death all the time, but I think it's really fucking sick because in that moment, God took every single sin. No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean God. Jesus took on every single sin ever committed onto infinitum, always and forever, any sin. And in that moment suffered every single one of them. And that's what is memorialized on all the walls. Not him rising from hell after freeing everyone that wasn't able to be saved because they died before him. That's not memorialized on all of these worship centers. No, it's the moment in which he suffered every rape, every skinning of a human, every molestation, everyone committing that, every theft, every murder, every suicide, all in one moment. That's what's memorialized on any temple, on any church. Fucking disgusting. Not him triumphing, but the blood sacrifice. That's my take. Sorry, you can be insulted, and I think you should be, because I really want you to start thinking about it. So then reason responds and says, "God," and that's an exclamation. That's not, crying out for God, which again is another thing that modern Christianity is hell-bent on. You should never take God's name in vain. And I'll say it every single time I come by it, probably because it's another very irksome thing for me. Not taking God's name in vain means don't act like God told you to do something when you don't have a clear relationship with God in the first place. When you don't hear anything from God, don't act like you're working in his name. How insulting. So, reason exclaims, "God, and what does this mean, love?" Says reason, "Teach my intellect, since you have appeased my other questions." Love responds, "This means," says love, "that this soul does not belong to herself, which is why she cannot have anxiety, for her thought is at rest in a peaceful place, that is, in the Trinity, and thus she cannot move herself from it, nor have anxiety, as long as her lover is content. From this place no one falls into sin, and any sin which was ever done," responds love to reason, "is as displeasing to her will as it is to God's. It is his displeasure itself which gives to the soul such displeasure." That sounds like the Matrix. That sounds like you're hooked up to a tub and entities outside of you have, affixed a tube for you to feed on, and then also a tube to be fed off of you. You're in a stasis. Seriously, why exist? Why be created in the first place? That's pretty fucking sick. But nevertheless, says love, the Trinity has no anxiety in her on account of such displeasure. Why would the Trinity have anxiety? The Trinity is now recognized as an entity unto itself, but if you look into Babylonian mythology, they also recognize that there are gods of dark and gods of light. And when I say also recognize, I meant that the gods of light exist in a trinity, and that was the first mention of there being a trinity, especially in the land in which Christianity was born from, which came after Babylonian mythology. And again, even in Christian religion, this trinity is subsisting off of 3 different entities, thus the Trinity. It is not an entity unto itself. The logic follows that God makes up, the head of the Trinity, and then the Holy Spirit or the Holy Ghost, and then the Son being Jesus. And the Holy Ghost is what Jesus left behind after he descended to hell. To give humanity a chance at not going to hell. It's what is like your guiding light, your ability to talk with God directly, or at least, get close to. There are arguments whether it is the soul itself, or if it is like Mary and it intercedes for the soul, if it is your conscience, or if it's like a moral boost to your conscience. But that is essentially what the Holy Ghost is. And when I say Jesus descended to hell, again, the story goes, Jesus died on the cross as a blood sacrifice. The blood fell to the earth, and metaphorically soaked humanity in his blood, and technically in that moment of his death he took on every single sin, like I said. So after he died, that's him dying to humanity. He descends to hell, where patternistically everyone prior went. It is said in that mythology that he fights the devil, maybe, or somehow finds the key, takes the key, unlocks every single person from hell, and then rises. And I don't know chronologically how this happens, but all these people from hell are inserted into a sort of pocket dimension in heaven called Abraham's bosom. And then during that time, God is dimensionally hopping around Earth just to let everybody that was associated with him know that he is alive again, because fun times for fun people. And then he rises to heaven, and it says he joins the Godhead. So he does not become God. Likewise, Trinity does not become, God either. It's a means of helping you understand that it is separate but whole, that these are parts of the Godhead, but that the Godhead is still the God in and of itself, is still God being the main God. And these souls in Abraham's bosom are to be released at the end of days for fun. I just realized I have my headphones on. Sorry. Shock's headphones. Not asking for a sponsorship, but telling you should go support them. I know Ray-Ban makes theirs, but I bought Shock's and really, really held up, and they have a good battery life. So if at all interested, I'm not supported. Obviously, I'm a very small-time creator, but they're really good. And if you ever see me wearing them in this video or other videos, I just forgot they were on. I don't have hearing aids. I'm sorry. So yeah, chapter 16 ends in, essentially just pointing out again that she exists in a stasis. God is good without containment is how it ends. Not sure if I read that part. Okay, I didn't. Sorry. But if this soul, who is at rest so high, could help her neighbors. She would aid them with all her power in their need. But the thoughts of such souls are so divine because they are not impeded with things passing or created, which might conceive anxiety within them, since God is good without containment. Well, I guess, God's not the one being contained there, she is. So I don't know that needs to be said, but it could have just been God is good. So on to chapter 17. It is titled, Here Love Responds to Reason About What She Said, that these souls give to nature what she asks. And nature is capitalized as an entity onto itself. So new introduction. Love is talking. This soul gives to nature whatever she asks. And it is true, says Love, that this soul has neither care nor love for temporal things, which she would know how to gain in refusing nature her demand. But a guilty conscience would cause to be taken from her what is her own. What? Okay, sorry, I had to turn the page. And nature, temporal things which she would know how to gain in refusing nature her demand. But a guilty conscience would cause to be taken from her what is her own. She shouldn't have a guilty conscience because she doesn't exist. But such creatures are so excellent that one would not dare to speak overtly about them, especially about their practice by which these souls possess being from good intellect. I would assume nature is what is being mentioned when it says there. Or it is giving reference to the amount of individuals that died to themselves. I would assume, I guess, the latter makes more sense. And then it goes on to say, but there are few who taste such intellect. So not a lot of people are able to get through the 10 virtues and die to themselves. And therein, again, she is now insinuating and propping her ego up above others, insinuating that, she deserves recognition as one of the rare few who are capable of doing this. Love speaks. I have said before, says Love, that one dare not speak overtly about it, but covertly? This whole book is overtly talking about it. None of this is covert at all. You published this. And no doubt on account of the simple intellects of other creatures, lest they misapprehend to their damage. So I think that's just assurance, if she does get attacked by the church for heresy, which did happen, she did die, that would have been able to, should I presume in her writing this, would have been able to help her argue that no, I meant well, obviously, and I don't intend for just anyone to get their hands on this, only if, they exist within God's grace or they have incredible intellect. And I feel like that's a plea towards the emperor's clothing or new robe or whatever it's called. You say that only those with high intellect can understand it. You'll have a bunch of people flocking and saying, well, I'm of high intellect. Of course I can understand it, even if what was said wasn't able to be understood in the first place. The way of arguing and covering your ass ahead of time. Such souls, such souls of whom this book speaks, which touches on some things about their practice, possessed by righteousness of their being, which is pure and divine being, such a condition within them that they possess nothing. That makes of them a very good Buddhist monk. And they are confident that even if they live until the judgment day, which is what I just mentioned in a prior rant at the end of days, and it's not end of all days, as some churches have begun to understand it. It means the end of earth existing by itself. So And I guess it was relevant recently. A bunch of people got scared about the rapture. There is an understanding in the Bible, but I don't know the exact reference, that there is a separation between heaven, hell, and earth. This same understanding is shared in, Lao Tzu, the Tao, the Art of War. In the Art of War, it's more like feng shui, giving reference to heaven being anything that exists under the sky and in the sky. And I think earth is more in regard to like humanity. I'd have to revisit it, but so I feel like that's just, a shared commonality, and with practice of longevity, it's like a game of telephone. It can be misconstrued. So having said all of that, the Bible goes through, all of these books are written by individuals that lived out their time prior to modern day. And the thing that explains the separation, I guess, or rather the combination of them, end of days and judgment day. So the fall of the angels was started because Satan challenged God and said, humans suck and they're always going to fail you. I don't want to be subservient to them. I love you more. And God said, well, fuck you. You need to listen to me. I am all powerful. And Satan said, bet. How about I bet you that they will always fuck up. I don't need to do anything. I'll just invite them into the direction and they'll fuck you over. God said, bet. You get dominion over earth. And that's where the devil or Satan is. And hell was essentially, from my understanding, designed as a punishment for the angels that fell, and like a separate dimension. Okay, and then there was a mix-up, because why not? And humans got sent there because why not, right? And so towards the end of the days, the first thing that happens is that hell is released onto earth. And every Christian believes that is the worst thing to happen. But if those who are sent to hell were created by humanity, and all of humanity's wrong, and Christianity, its goal is to alleviate that wrong, then the best thing that could happen is hell rising. Because then all of Christianity would be purposed. They would be able to make amends for their inability to make everything perfect for God. So hell rises. And that's, all these plagues and stuff. That's Judgment Day. God looks at the earth and is like, you guys fucking suck, man. Like, I gave you avatars that told you how to live, and you suck at living. And I'm here to tell you that. And that is when all of these monsters are released. Essentially, it could be metaphorical for generally scientifically just tectonic plates shifting, and that's supposed to happen every 25,000 years anyways, is like a whole polarity shift. I don't know if that's finite science or it's believed in science by a lot of people, and it would cause a lot of cataclysmic chaos. And so that actually falls heavily in line with all these metaphors of what's released at quote-unquote the end of days. And the end of days specifically speaks on the end of earth existing on its own into Judgment Day, which is supposed to promote a cleansing of everything that isn't good enough, or a healing of anything that isn't good enough, through a hellacious, tumultuous time. And then after that, everything will become good enough, and heaven descends onto earth, and all three of these things exist in one place. And that's biblical. But everybody that wants to go to heaven, just stay here. Ta-da! Problem solved. Sorry, I mentioned Judgment Day, and that's what Judgment Day is. It's just God reaping. Because apparently God doesn't do that any other day. They would not be able to have anxiety of the heart 1 hour about anything that they might need for all the gold of the world. For all the gold of the world is just a colloquial term, like it's not really needed there. With the exception, and not more, of the portion where nature needs what is necessary in order to give them what is theirs. And I guess it's just part of the orchestrated efforts of God living through this person, but everything that is subservient to God working together to create what is perfect. If such souls possess something, what? The souls were supposed to possess nothing. If such souls possess something, and few people know where these souls are, but it is necessary that they be of the righteous goodness of love in order to sustain the faith of the Holy Church. Okay, so it goes into thus if they possess something. Now it's repeating itself and starting the if again. And should they know that others might have greater need than they, such souls would never withhold anything, even if they were certain that nothing would be growing on earth any more, neither bread nor grain nor other sustenance. Because they already don't exist, so what is death to someone that doesn't exist? The perfect warrior is one who is already dead. Soldier, not warrior. I apologize. There is a distinction between the two. Essentially, historically, the best fighter is someone who has no reason to live, nothing to hold on to. And a lot of Christianity is just military. It's, they're making soldiers. All of this teaching is the same teaching you would give to someone that is at war. And you hear that a lot in non-denominational teaching as well, is that they are at war and it is spiritual warfare. But again, something else that I don't agree with, and I'll be called, baseless and moralless, but if God is everything, omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, and if God created everything, why are you at war? That doesn't make any fucking sense. You're supposed to love God, trust God, and be, sated in God. And the only thing it says is that you are my hands and my feet, and through you I will perform miracles. It does not say you are my hands and my feet, and through you I will slaughter masses. Like, why are you fighting? Who are you fighting? Is it your fight? Christians are bloodthirsty and gung-ho about it, and then they get to feel morally superior because these entities are non-corporeal. It's still you're still signing off on this being of your person, and again, do not act in God's do not take God's name in vain. Who told you to do that? Your pastor? This is true, says love, do not doubt any of it. Such is their nature through pure righteousness, and such righteousness is divine righteousness, who is given his measure to the soul. So I guess this just, delineates there is a specific difference between righteousness in and of itself and that which can be concluded as divinity where righteousness is concerned. There's a difference. To me, synonymous as fuck. I don't think it needs to be separated. What is righteous was supposed to be divine. So it's weird to separate the two. Now, having said that, divine righteousness enters the scene as its own entity. This is correct, says divine righteousness. It is necessary that complete justice be fulfilled in her. That's wild. In Christianity, that's supposed to be for God to dictate. Because, only God is capable of being objective. Even if God exists in your person, and your person is just an avatar, that is a subjective existence that the objective can play through. But the subjective would be understood in its effect around it. It's not, the avatar is not God itself, and so its effect is still as minuscule as any other normal human effect would be. So how can justice in and of itself be had? Whatever. Pondering to ponder. If the soul keeps what is necessary from her neighbor, she only keeps what she does not possess according to the perfection of the peace of charity in which she lives completely. This understanding, I believe, is perfectly justified, but I don't believe that it's justified through, yourself existing as an avatar. I think it's how people should exist. It's how trees exist. Through their root system, they're able to communicate. If one has more nitrate or, carbon dioxide and another one needs exactly that resource. But they don't essentially give more than... No, I can't say that. Some trees will starve themselves for the shrubbery that exists around them. And there are instances... Trees are a fucking amazing subject to study. There are some instances of flowering trees, like I think almond or walnut trees, that through different state barriers as well have the ability to communicate to each other, given climate effects and the perceived understanding of what will happen in the future given climate, and whether or not they should bear fruit. So these nuts, these almonds and walnuts, whether they should bear fruit or retain resources to bear it the next flowering season. And so even as a network, they can keep to themselves, and which does drastically affect the ecosystem. Any of the rodents or humans themselves relying on this food resource would have to go without for an entire winter, an entire season, an entire year, and pray that they understand the signs enough to know when it'll come next. It's fucking fascinating if you get into how trees communicate and their effects on things through their communication. And I, again, think that humans stand to learn a lot from natural resources of information like that. They could do better by themselves from learning from trees. Keeps what she does not possess according to the perfection of the peace of charity in which she lives completely, for this is her just food. Also, why would such souls feel guilty about taking what is necessary if necessity asks it? So in a prior video I made, it was what is good versus evil, and I guess this is just, propping that up, that what is necessary is what is good and what is unnecessary is what is evil, but that humanity being a subjective existence and having piss poor communication among itself, would promote it to a position of not knowing essentially what is actually objectively necessary, and therein maybe never actually being capable of knowing what is good. But if, you're an avatar for God and God is an objective resource of information, then yeah, you would know what is good because you would know what is necessary. So by its own developed logic, even if it crosses the general understanding or the general logic of Christianity, by its own developed logic, this makes sense. For these souls, this would be to fault the innocence and to encumber the peace in which such a soul rests from all such things in the stasis that it exists outside of God living through its body. Who would make his conscience guilty about taking the necessities from the four elements as light from heaven, warmth from fire, dew from water, and from the earth what sustains us? The U.S. Did it ask who? The U.S. We have how many people starving? Like, throughout the 2000s, all of the Appalachian Mountain, system was in third world levels of poverty, and the U.S. just ignored it out of convenience. Like, the U.S. would deny what is just perceived here as a necessity. Also, fun fact about the U.S., and I don't know that enough people that aren't poor think about this. If you restrict gun rights, there are a lot of communities that do rely on guns for hunting, and it makes a good amount of food for a good amount of people. But the thing that I mentioned for, existing in poverty is that you do need to buy, maintain, and subscribe, because it's not a lifetime membership, to a hunting license. So even in that, the U.S. does not believe that it's a necessity. You know who it was promised that, the necessity would be honored? Indigenous communities. You know who crossed that? The U.S. government. You know what in Alaska happens a good amount with fishing? There was supposed to be this idea that, and I really only know of the indigenous community in Alaska mostly. There's like 450 recognized tribes, so I can't speak in a general sense. But I do know the rivers up in Alaska, you're supposed to be, per tribe, allotted so many fish and allotted a time in which you have the ability to lay out fishing nets, which generally, if you just have a fishing license and you're not indigenous, it's not legal to use fishing nets. But the indigenous, that's an allotted ability. Who steps on that, and that's what I was getting at. Upriver, the U.S. government will lay their own nets out, so that downriver, where the indigenous are allowed to fish, they get less. Again, just the U.S. government is notorious for not allowing necessity, and starving people out on what is necessary being a privilege. These elements were graciously made by God as other things. That's socialism. Christianity should have absolutely paid into socialism, but here you have, in the US specifically, you have Christianity denying socialism as communism because uneducated individuals decided that they were one and the same, when our system is literally a socialist democracy. Our whole U.S. country, the ones that went against all of these treaties with the indigenous, mind you, was supposed to be a socialist democracy. Our taxes are supposed to fund our own people and help our societies and communities and circulate our economy, so that we would be the powerful nation that a lot of Christian nationalists think we are. Instead, our taxes oftentimes go where, bodies of positions of higher power believe they ought to go, which normally is not our societies and communities. I never got hugely into communism myself, so I'm not going to begin critiquing it, but I do absolutely wholeheartedly know that socialism is not communism, and as far as I fucking understand it, socialism is not bad. And I hate the demonizing of it when, those who would demonize it, their religion was supposed to teach it. As such, souls make use of all things made and created of which nature has need, in complete peace of heart. So they make of the earth upon which they walk. Well, that doesn't seem to make sense. Made and created of which nature has need, so they make of the earth upon which they walk. Make of the earth what? Whatever. Then love speaks again. They possess the good foundation, says love, and the high place, which holds them in repose from all things. I think that's just giving reference to the stasis they're supposed to be existing in, outside of, the flesh, the body. I guess I'll go on to read chapter 18, because it's really short. How such creatures know no longer how to speak of God. Such creatures, I would assume such creatures are the annihilated soul. Chapter 18, we're still not going over the 10 virtues. So the soul is speaking. Such creatures know no longer how to speak of God, for they know not how to say where God is. For they know not how to say where God is, any more than how to say who God is. Everywhere. Everything. It's already been stated in this book alone. It's crossing its own logic. For whoever speaks of God when he wishes, and to whom he wishes, and where he wishes to speak, must not doubt, but know without doubt, says this soul. So because they're imperfect, they can't talk. Because they're not objective, and they are subjective, and they are human. They're in a finite existence. They should shut the fuck up. Hello Kitty was side tangent, ADHD side tangent. The initial TV series of Hello Kitty, she was modeled after the perfect woman, and that's why Hello Kitty doesn't have a mouth. History lesson. Says this soul, such a one never once felt the true seed of divine love. I hope not. Which makes the soul completely surprised without being aware of it. How can you be surprised if you're not aware of it? Crossed logic again. For the true, pure seed of divine love, without creaturely matter. Oh my God. I was making sick jokes, but no, I'm thinking that the sick jokes were real. Which is given by the Creator to the creature, takes away such practice entirely, that is, of speaking. Okay, so that's where the sentence ends, but the thing about that is that takes away such practice entirely, that is, of speaking, is in brackets. So very technically, the sentence ends without creaturely matter, which is given by the Creator to the creature. Also, okay, so it says takes away such practice entirely, that is, of speaking. So the practice is speaking, but then that's supposed to be in reference to the soul being surprised but not knowing it. And so speaking is synonymous with knowing something? That's bullshit. I say a lot of things and I don't know a lot of things. And I know I'm not the only one. And the custom of such souls is to understand much and to forget quickly through the subtlety of the lover. Jesus Christ. I don't think I was wrong in making sick jokes there. I think it was about the sick jokes. Okay, I probably explained it in a previous video because I am perpetually bothered, just in general, I guess, but by this existence in life, and Saint Catherine of Siena. I'm starting to believe that Marguerite Porete is like another incarnation of Saint Catherine of Siena. Saint Catherine of Siena was abused by her family. Oh no. Okay, I thought the book shut. She was abused by her family, and so psychologically she replaced her family with Mary as her mom, Joseph as her dad, and then her brothers being members of the apostles. And maybe she had sisters, but yeah. And I think she was like physically abused as well as she was used to do all the chores. And so whatever abuse she suffered at their hands, she would say, well, it's making me holier because it's coming from God. And she would go from there and perform miracles, which is essentially what escalated her into sainthood. I don't think the miracles came first. I think what came first, literally, was her. She had this incredible moment of euphoria when she was meditating on God and had a moment where God came to her and lifted her to such chemical heights that she would never be able to have relations with anyone ever again because of the euphoria she experienced through God's spirit. And then she would go from there and, perform miracles like drinking cancerous pus. I believe maybe she held someone with leprosy. I could be confusing that with Mother Teresa. But yeah, she did a bunch of weird shit. And then afterwards she would claim that, I believe it was Jesus that came to her and married her. And the ring was his foreskin that he tied around her ring finger. And now the Catholic Church lopped off her arm and it is embalmed and encased for viewing because it's holy. Because it's Jesus's foreskin. And I'm pretty sure chapter 18 just gave reference to that same kind of euphoria. I think she got really abused. And whoever did it, it wasn't odd for nuns to be sexually abused. This just feels like she psychologically broke and wrote a book about that. And now people tout it as I hope, the takeaway for a lot of people that are following it is fucking fantastic. And I hope that it does bring them closer to source. Alright, thank you, good night, stay safe, take care of yourself.